This is another file sealed under the Nocturne archive. If you've heard the previous cases, you already know what that means. Silence, reason, and something that keeps slipping past logic. If this is your first time here, keep listening. Some stories can only be told to those who refuse to look away. The hiss of magnetic tape, a relay click, slow mechanical hum. File No. 09, the Marion County tape. This is one of the few cases I was asked not to share. Not by the church, nor by the state, but by men who trade favors for silence. They said the family deserved peace, but silence never stopped the truth. Tonight, it speaks again. The tape was found in 2006 inside the ruins of a farmhouse near Marion County, Indiana. A private investigator named Tom Reese, former state trooper, had been hired to locate a family long presumed dead, the Winthams. In the basement, beneath ash and warped metal, he discovered a coffee tin wrapped in newspaper dated October 1998. Inside it lay a Scotch VHS, unmarked except for a felt-tip scrawl, EX-01. There was no label, no explanation. Whoever sealed it wanted it buried. Reese logged the evidence, then sat alone in a playback room meant for DUI interviews. A Panasonic at G1980 hummed, its green power light casting a sickly bar across the table. The screen bloomed to snow, then a woman's voice, in nomen patris. Et Fili, its spirit is sancti. Her tone was wrong, too slow, too careful, the syllables foreign in her mouth. A child cried. A man muttered, "Keep her still." Tom Reese wasn't a believer. In his service record, he was described as methodical, unimpressed, and durable. He had investigated arsons, suicides, and one case of a man who disappeared after burying his own car. But the Winthams' fire was different. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, just a home that seemed to have melted inward, as if something had withdrawn from it, not entered. His report begins like a manual. Basement partially collapsed. Fire origin unknown. Discovered container at 1547 hours. Contained VHS cassette. Type Scotch T120. Inscription EX-01. Evidence logged. The rest of his handwriting tightens. Letters pressed deep into the paper. The sign of a man writing faster than his belief. He describes the odor of burned sugar, the uneven melting of plastic, and a faint metallic residue along the basement walls, as though iron filings had been magnetized by heat. When he brought the tape to the sheriff's office, no one wanted to view it. The department had seen its share of confessions and traumas, but the word exorcism still carried a weight that science preferred to rename. Reese convinced a young technician to assist, a 24-year-old named Helen Cray, who would later refuse to speak publicly about that night. The playback room was small, lined with soundproof foam that had yellowed with age. The old Panasonic deck groaned as it swallowed the tape, at first static. Then the familiar woman's voice. But this time Reese took notes by the second. At 0 hours 3 minutes and 41 seconds, the child's crying stops abruptly. At 0 hours 3 minutes and 46 seconds, the audio channel spikes, a single waveform like a heartbeat. At 0 hours 3 minutes and 47 seconds, the image wavers and recovers. That number again, 3:47, the time frozen on the kitchen clock, now mirrored in the timeline of playback. Reese asked Cray if the deck had jumped. She shook her head. The counter had advanced normally, but the visual field had changed. The camera was no longer pointed at the girl or her parents. It faced the doorway, as if whoever was filming had turned suddenly to look behind them. A draft passed through the microphone, not loud, but directional, a wind that didn't belong in a sealed room. In the reflection on a plastic-covered window, Reese swore he saw movement, not a shadow, but a faint bending of light, like heat distortion over asphalt. He paused, rewound, played again. The distortion repeated, identical, frame for frame. A video artifact, except it shouldn't have been consistent. The next sequence lasts 12 minutes. The father's voice deteriorates, the Latin dissolves into rhythm. The girl begins to repeat a single syllable, la, la, at irregular intervals. The sound is childlike but empty of intention, like a winged-up doll out of battery. Reese's notebook reads, breathing persists under all channels. Frequency drops with repetition. Possible feedback loop or duplication error. Cray tried adjusting the tracking wheel. The tape resisted. Then at the 30-minute mark, the image tore, splitting horizontally, showing 2 frames at once, one of the kitchen, one of a dark field outside. The visual bleed. When Reese returned at midnight, he brought a portable digitizer, borrowed from evidence, and a thermos of coffee he never opened. He shut the playback room door and killed the overheads. Only the green pilot light and the television glow remained. He pressed play, then rec on the converter. If the tape had one truth, he wanted it duplicated before anyone told him to stop looking. For 9 minutes, the same kitchen, plastic sheathed windows, rope on the chair, photocopied liturgy. Then the picture rolled, blurred, and settled into nothing, a static frame of the empty room. No people, no flashlight, just compressor hum and the soft tick of a clock without a second hand. He thought the tape had eaten its own scene. He kept recording. The audio level set low, steady until a laugh rose in the noise floor. A child's laugh, brief and bright, wrong because it carried no air from a human chest. 16 seconds passed. Another laugh, identical in shape and duration. He rewound and counted 0 o'clock plus 0:16 plus 0:32. The pattern persisted across 4 minutes like a metronome carved into oxide. Reese opened the digitized waveform on the old laptop. What looked like random hiss formed copy-pasted islands. Each laughed the same amplitude envelope, the same spectral notches, as though someone had laid a stamp over the line and pressed down. No natural sound repeats that perfectly. Even machines vary. But this was perfect and therefore wrong. He isolated the left channel, inverted it, and folded it into the right at -6 decibels. Something else surfaced, head-switching noise, and beneath it, a very low, almost architectural breath. The kind of infrasonic throb you feel in old churches when the furnace kicks on. It mapped at 19 hertz, too low for most speakers, but the room itself carried it. He wrote in the log, subsonic presence below program material. Possible second pass or erasure ghost. At 3:47 on the digitizer counter, the image micro-shifted a half-pixel nudge as if the camera had been moved after the fact. The chair was still, the rope still cinched, but the knot was different. The tail now pointed left, not right. He checked earlier frames. It had always pointed right. That discrepancy doesn't prove a haunting. It proves 2 recordings. He scrubbed the empty kitchen segment at 1/4 speed and found a single, frame 1, where the refrigerator By the time the tape reached the Indiana State Forensics Lab, it had already earned a reputation. Technicians handled it with gloves, not for contamination, but superstition. The case file labeled it simply, Evidence 09A, Religious Activity. Reese's resignation had complicated the chain of custody. His initials appeared twice where only one was expected. No one could explain why 2 forms bore 2 different inks from the same pen. When the lab digitized the tape, they found traces of dual recording density, overlapping signals recorded at different times, as if the same cassette had been reused without erasure. But the pattern didn't fit known standards. One layer was NTSC, the other closer to PAL speed, slightly slower, impossible to coexist on a single analog track without ghosting the image, yet both played seamlessly. Technician James Holbrook noted in his memorandum, the magnetic flux suggests partial overwrite from a low-frequency source not matching consumer equipment. Playback reveals no visible splice. Layers alternate at subframe intervals. Recommend classification as experimental tape anomaly. He might as well have written miracle, but labs prefer cleaner nouns. The audio analysis was worse. They isolated the breathing pattern Reese had logged. Its waveform displayed unnatural symmetry, each exhale identical, down to microdecibel variance. No human respiration repeats like that. When inverted and time stretched, the pattern produced something resembling speech, a string of phonemes forming the phrase non sum ego, Latin for I am not me. At first, the staff assumed it was pareidolia, the human need to hear order and noise. But when they ran it again through a phase mirror filter, the phrase reversed itself, ego sum, I am. Holbrook sent a memo to the Sheriff's Department requesting the original environment be inspected for sources of low-frequency interference. The reply was brief: farmhouse destroyed. Site sealed by county order, access denied. 2 days later, the Lab S digitizer, one of those clunky JVC decks with servo feedback, began cycling on by itself at 3:47 a.m. each night. No tape loaded, no scheduled task. Just a soft mechanical whir, a motor searching for tape that wasn't there. The building's night security logs confirm this detail. So do the electric bills. They show a spike in power consumption at that. I obtained the first of the breath tapes in 2009 through a retired officer who'd handled Reese's abandoned storage unit. The box was small, plastic, marked only with the word listen. Inside were 12 cassettes, each labeled in the same meticulous handwriting, breath_1 through breath_12. No dates. No context. The recordings weren't long, between 5 and 12 minutes each, but what they contained was not simply air. When digitized, every tape began with silence, followed by a faint hum consistent with old electrical wiring. Then, at random intervals, the same sound, a drawn-out inhale followed by a pause and a shallow exhale. Identical each time as though sampled and replayed, but with one subtle difference. Every third breath carried a brief rattle, like fingernails brushing aluminum. In the first tape, the rattle lasts a fraction of a second. In the 12th, it grows longer, 3 full seconds, until it becomes less a sound than a message. When spectrograph analysis was applied, those rattling tones revealed a waveform resembling spoken cadence, an alternating pattern matching human syllabic rhythm. When slowed and filtered, the spectrogram formed a signature curve nearly identical to the voice print of Tom Reese himself, recorded years earlier in his police radio archives. It was as if the tape had learned to breathe him back. The second anomaly appeared in the metadata of the digital transfers. Though each cassette was recorded at different times, their embedded timestamps, artifacts of the digitizing software, all converged to the same minute and second, 3 hours 47 minutes and 16 seconds AM. The lab I used in Chicago couldn't explain it. They claimed a file corruption or a sync error, but there was no corruption. The files were clean, flawless, and too precise to be coincidence. The officer who de-recovered the tapes also mentioned finding a VHS cassette inside the same storage box. The label was nearly erased, but under infrared light, a few letters emerged. EX-02. He admitted he'd tried to play it once. Nothing but black screen, he said, but the machine didn't stop. It just breathed. He meant that literally. The playback deck began emitting short, pulsed air burst through its ventilation grid, as though its motor were exhaling. It continued for 16 seconds after the tape was ejected. I obtained that cassette, too. Its shell was warped from heat, but the tape inside looked untouched, black, gleaming, magnetic like fresh oil. I didn't play it, not then. Instead, I examined the label under magnification. The faint print showed 2 overlaid timestamps written in pencil, 1998 and 2006, 2 years. 2 recordings, one life repeating inside the other. The parallels grew impossible to ignore, dual-layer tape densities. A recurring timestamp, 3:47 a.m. I waited months before playing EX-02. Fear disguises itself as patience. That's how investigators lie to themselves. When I finally set the deck on my desk, I used gloves, not for contamination, but for distance, as if latex could protect from remembrance. The tape inserted smoothly, no resistance, no squeal of age. I monitored voltage, room temperature, and magnetic field. Everything read normal. The timestamp on my recorder, 3:31 a.m., I hit play. The screen opened to black. At first, no audio, only the gentle rustle of mechanical tape, the static hiss that lives in the bones of analog, then the faintest click. A voice. It wasn't the father or the mother from EX-01. It was a man breathing between words, speaking softly. Directly into the microphone. Tom Reese, test recording. Channel 1. The date on the camera overlay read October 31st, 2006, 8 years after the original exorcism. He was alive, alone, and filming inside what looked like a motel room. Green carpet, pale wallpaper, a rotary fan humming off beat. The camera was fixed on the television set, a VHS deck beside it. On screen, a pause icon blinked faintly, the image frozen mid-frame on the same Marion County kitchen. Reese leaned toward the lens. "I think it's recording over itself," he whispered. "Every time I play it, something new appears under the static." He pressed play. The kitchen footage resumed. The woman's prayer, the child's cry, the familiar breathing. But this time, the camera's reflection in the window showed Reese himself, standing in the motel, watching the scene from 8 years prior. The image folded in on itself, layer upon layer, the observer becoming part of the observed. Then, distortion. Horizontal tearing, a hiss that turned rhythmic, 16 pulses. Reese steadied the lens, murmuring, "It's trying to line up." The frame flared white. When it cleared, the kitchen clock appeared again, 3:47 a.m. The second hand reattached, ticking forward now, 1, 2, 3, before stopping at 3 hours, 47 minutes, and 16 seconds. That was when the motel lights dimmed. The EMF meter on my table, untouched, spiked. Voltage rose by 4%. Temperature dropped to 15 degrees Celsius. On screen, Reese looked directly into the camera. His lips moved, but his voice emerged not from the speakers, from behind me, low, close, familiar. "If you're listening, it's already printed." The tape crackled. For a single frame, the feed split, 2 timelines fighting for control. One showed Reese in the motel, the other the empty kitchen. Between them, a silhouette, height approximate to the Wintham girl, head slightly tilted, no visible eyes. Then the image stabilized into darkness. The counter stopped at 16 o'clock precisely. Playback time, 16 minutes. When I ejected the cassette, it was warm, not. I did what investigators do when fear pretends to be method. I built a cage of numbers. I cloned the EX-02 capture to 3 separate drives, verified checksums, and generated a frame-accurate log. I printed the waveform at 1:1 scale and pinned it to my wall, a city of peaks and alleys. If the anomaly was in the data would betray it. At 2:11 p.m., the first betrayal, Drive A's hash no longer matched its paper twin. I hadn't touched it. The file size was identical, the modified date unchanged, but the checksum, our secular sacrament, had drifted. When I opened the clip, my own voice at timestamp 0 hours, 16 minutes, and 0 seconds was gone. In its place, a soft counting in Reese's cadence, 1, 2, 3, and then silence, as if I had never spoken in that minute. I compared Drive B. The audio was intact, but a 2-frame blur had appeared over the motel television. Freezing the blur revealed the kitchen clock again, 3 hours, 47 minutes, and 16 seconds, and a faint second reflection behind Reese's someone standing just outside the camera's field. Shoulder and jawline only, like the image had stolen a witness from air. I brought in controls, a clean room, a fresh recorder, independent power lines. I filmed my process dates, meters, every redundancy a skeptic could want. When I replayed that footage, the counter on my own camera stuttered at 0 hours, 3 minutes, and 47 seconds, then recovered. Frame by frame, a ghost timecode had burned itself into glass. I phoned Helen Cray. She didn't answer until midnight. Her voice was steady in the way of someone who has finished being afraid. "Do not isolate the sound," she said. "Do not separate it from the picture. That's how it gets in." Before I could ask what it meant, the line clicked with a breath, not from either of us, but across the carrier itself, a gentle pressure wave. Then she hung up. In the days that followed, the pattern continued. Any attempt to denoise, to enhance, to clean, produced more of it. A high-pass filter removed hiss and revealed a second Reese counting down from 16. A low-pass filter erased voices and left only the furnace-like 19 hertz that had haunted the lab. Collapsing the stereo field made the sound migrate into the room. Expanding it made the speakers feel like lungs. I began writing times on paper rather than typing them. I avoided the number between 15 and 17. When colleagues asked, I said the case was technical. They took the hint and stayed away. Fear, like mold, prefers the damp. On the 7th night, I placed EX-02 back in its sleeve and locked it in a steel box. I slept for the first time in 2 days. At 3:47 a.m., the box clicked. Metal contracts went cold, I told myself, yet the apartment was warm. I lay awake and counted without meaning to 1 to 16, with the certainty that if I reached 17, something would answer. Morning brought a rational impulse. Let someone else hold the match. I packaged Drive C and mailed it to a digital forensics contact in Denver with a note. "Do not play past 16 o'clock. He called 3 days later. "You clever bastard," he laughed. "Your timer trick, nice touch." I asked what trick. He said the file ends at 16 o'clock, but the player keeps running for exactly 16 seconds afterward, as if the footage has tail, no frames, just time. "Never seen anything like it," he said. Made my deck brief. I returned to Marion County in late autumn. 15 years had passed since the fire, but the Wintham property still stood in bureaucratic limbo. Technically condemned, legally untouched. The county kept it fenced, a perimeter of rusted wire and warning signs bleached into illegibility. From the road, it looked like any other Midwestern ruin. Barn collapsed in on itself, well choked with weeds, a silence too deliberate to be natural. I parked beyond the tree line and carried my recorder, EMF meter, and a small portable deck loaded with a fresh tape. The temperature was mild, windless. I noted it all because when science fails, observation becomes prayer. The farmhouse foundation remained, a cracked rectangle of concrete veined with soot. I stepped across it, my boots stirring fine ash that still smelled faintly of plastic and sugar. The air pressure dipped slightly, as if the place exhaled. I started the recorder, the tape spun, the reels whispered. For the first 3 minutes, nothing but wind across the grass. Then the wind began to count. Not words, rhythm. 16 beats of breeze, then stillness. 16 again, every interval identical. The EMF meter jumped from baseline 0.2 to 4.7, stabilized, then dropped back to silence. I adjusted my watch, 3:40 p.m., daylight, no reason for spikes. Still, I could feel the faint buzz in my molars, the way analog current announces itself inside the jaw. I walked toward the depression behind the house, the same field Reese had described. From a distance, it looked like a shallow pond of dry earth, its soil darker than the rest. Up close, I saw fragments of melted PVC and a few rusted nails protruding from what might once have been a chair leg. The ground was soft, magnetic sand clinging to my boots as if drawn by static. I set the deck on the earth and pressed record. The VU meters rose immediately, though the air was silent. At 0:16 seconds, a pulse. At 0:32, another. By 3:47, the signal had organized into a breath pattern. It wasn't playback. It was live. When I moved away from the recorder, the pattern followed, faint, spatial, repositioning around me as though the field itself was adjusting microphone distance. I froze. The EMF meter hit 19 hertz. My breath condensed even though the temperature was 60 degrees. Then a sound, thin, almost metallic. A child's laugh, far away but directionless, arriving in 16-second intervals, always the same timbre, the same amplitude, the same laugh from the breath tapes. I whispered the only control word that still had meaning. Stop. The recorder obeyed. The air did not. The rhythm continued, softer, now inside the body rather than around it, pulse syncing with my own. I checked my wristwatch again, 3:47 p.m. The second hand was missing. But it ticked anyway. I packed the equipment and backed away. My reflection shimmered in the windshield of my car. For 1 second, it flickered, my face overlaid with the faint outline of a girl's, her head tilted, mouth slightly open. The same half frame from EX-02. Back at the hotel, I played the field recording. The tape hissed, then played back. Every recording leaves a print. Magnetic, optical, chemical, it doesn't matter. A recording is a wound on time that refuses to close. For years, I believed that wounds could be studied, that by measuring their depth, one could predict recovery. But some wounds become mirrors. They don't heal, they reflect. After the Marion Field incident, I isolated in my lab for 2 weeks. I checked the EMF readings every hour, replaced cables, and built a Faraday cage around the work table. None of it mattered. Each morning, my oscilloscopes displayed a faint 19 hertz wave, even when disconnected from power. The instruments were remembering. At first, I assumed residual magnetization from the EX-02 cassette, but the waveform wasn't static. It evolved. Each day, the amplitude grew by 0.16 millivolts, the same fractional ratio that repeats in the tape as breathing interval. I plotted it over time. The graph formed a spiral. Not growth, replication. By the third night, sleep deprivation began producing sensory echo, a kind of afterimage behind sound. Every exhale in the room returned to me delayed by 16 seconds. If I whispered, the whisper came back, fractionally slower, until it harmonized with itself. It wasn't haunting. It was feedback between biology and magnetism. I invited 2 colleagues, physicists from Chicago, to witness the readings. They arrived skeptical, armed with spectrum analyzers and ridicule. At 3:47 a.m., the trace on the monitor doubled, 2 identical signatures. One belonged to the room. The other inverted phase belonged to one of them. He leaned closer to the mic, said, "Hello," and the echo answered, not delayed, not reflected, but corrected. His voice came back clearer, purer, missing the human tremor. He stepped back, pale. "That's not me," he whispered. I told him, "It is now." We recorded for 16 minutes. The waveform stabilized, then began to contract, folding its peaks into a flat line. The sound disappeared, but the microphone still registered input. The equipment was hearing what air could no longer carry. When we replayed the file, all 3 of our voices were there, layered, equalized into one tone, a single collective breath. After they left, I reviewed the data alone. The trace wasn't continuous. It was quantized into 16-second packets. Each packet began with the same 3 spectral ridges, identical to those on the breath_1 tapes. The system wasn't broadcasting, it was replaying us. That night, I ran a test on myself. I attached, there are cases you solve, and there are cases that simply stop asking to be solved. The Marion County tape belongs to the second kind. Every time I tried to archive it, something small refused to obey, A checksum drifting, a counter resetting, a page curling toward the light. The physical data has long been sealed, but what remains isn't the tape, it's the pattern, the breath. We measure sound as vibration through air, but what if the medium learns? What if, after enough repetition, air begins to mimic the rhythm of the voice that moved through it? If the human soul exists anywhere measurable, perhaps it lives in that echo of repetition, the magnetic echo that refuses to fade. I've come to think of Reese not as a victim, but as an archivist who went too far. He wanted to preserve what he couldn't understand, and the act of preservation became the act itself. Every scientist who touched the file after him added another layer of attention, another recording of the recording, until the signal no longer needed its source. It had learned self-reference. It had learned survival. When you watch the surviving digital transfer, there's a point at 0 hours, 3 minutes, and 47 seconds where the screen flickers, just a single frame easily missed. If you freeze it, you can see a small movement at the edge of the kitchen window. For years, people said it was dust, compression noise, or a reflection of the cameraman. It isn't. It's me, or rather, the reflection of me, captured when I played it the first time. That's the nature of this case. Every witness becomes another recording surface. Every listener adds another iteration to the loop. The Marion County tape is no longer about a girl, or a family, or even an exorcism. It is about what happens when observation itself becomes a ritual, when the line between watching and invoking disappears. The church calls that possession. Physics calls it feedback resonance. Neither term is wrong. I've stored the remaining fragments in a Faraday chamber beneath the university archives. They rest there, insulated by copper and silence. And yet, at 3:47 a.m. every morning, the security camera outside the vault flickers once, 16 frames of static identical each time. No sound, just a pulse. When people ask me why I keep studying these cases, I tell them it's not curiosity, it's containment. Because the moment we stop listening, the moment we look away, the sound doesn't cease, it spreads. Noise is memory without supervision. Tonight, I will end this recording the same way Reese ended his notes. There is no exorcism without audience, because what you just heard wasn't a story. It was a recording of your listening. And if the air around you feels heavier now, it's not fear. It's just the pattern taking shape. You'll notice it in 16 seconds when the clock shifts, when the room exhales.